And we also face systemic competition from those including the PRC, who challenge our interests, our security, and values and seek to undermine the rules-based international order. The United States seeks a world that is free, that is open, secure, and prosperous. And it's more important than ever that the United States work with allies and partners like Finland, who share a similar vision and commitment to democratic values that enable this vision of a more prosperous future for all of us. The United States values the friendship with Finland. And I have to say, the relationship with Finland, I don't think has ever been as strong as it is today, and as productive. And we work together to address some of the most pressing challenges by promoting democracy, advancing human rights, addressing the climate crisis, ensuring regional and global security, and creating a more prosperous future for our citizens. We're working together on shared priorities in the Arctic, and we will continue our strong cooperation on a range of security and defense priorities, including Russia's war in Ukraine, and I'll talk more about that. But now let's talk a little bit about NATO. As President Biden has said, Finland and Sweden are two great democracies and two close, highly capable partners to join the strongest, most powerful defense alliance in the history of the world. And I think that's absolutely true and not an understatement. We're pleased with the progress that's obviously been made with Finland and Sweden becoming full members of the alliance. As we sit here today, 28 of the 30 countries have advanced that ratification process. We fully expect that Hungary and Turkey will do the same in a timely manner. It's critical we get this done. Time is not our friend, and things are not going to get better. So we need to make sure this alliance becomes stronger by the addition of Finland and Sweden to it. And I've said many times in the past that Finland and Sweden will be accretive to NATO. And let me just talk about Finland for a minute. The Finns bring a purpose-built Navy to NATO, purpose-built for the Baltic. They bring an Air Force with the addition of the new F-35 contract, will be one of the most advanced in Europe, if not in the world. And the conscription model in Finland makes available an Army capability larger than France, Germany, and Italy combined, which is really pretty remarkable. Think about that for a second, a country of 5.5 million people with that kind of capability. And I think more importantly is the consistent willingness to spend on defense. So spending on defense is not something new to the Finns. And they will continue to spend at 2% or more of GDP to continue that defense algorithm in the future. And then Finnish troops have already served shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. and NATO forces in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And as the President has said, Sweden and Finland have strong democracies, democratic institutions, strong militaries, strong, transparent economies, and a moral sense of what's right. They meet every NATO requirement, and then some. And having two new NATO members in the High North will enhance the security of our alliance and deepen our security cooperation across the board. Finland and Sweden joining the alliance will further strengthen NATO's collective security and deepen transatlantic partnerships. The United States remains committed to security with Finland, and we will continue working to remain vigilant against any threats or shared security to deter or confront aggression or the threat of aggression. And to that point, while we're very supportive of what's happening with NATO, of Finland joining NATO, we've also started discussions of a defense cooperation agreement with the Finns as well. And those things are not mutually exclusive, they're complementary in our world. And I think it just shows the commitment that the United States has to strengthening the relationship that we have with Finland. and will continue to strengthen the alliance's capacity to address all threats to transatlantic security, including terrorism, the malign use of emerging and destructive technologies, malicious cyber and hybrid, and Russia's aggressive actions and other challenges to the rules-based international order. We'll continue to strengthen collective resilience, protect critical infrastructure, and ensure energy security. But let's be clear, the United States does not seek a military conflict with Russia. NATO is a defensive alliance, but any military action directed against any NATO ally would trigger a strong response from the United States. We're modernizing the alliance for the world that we faced. We're committed to working with allies to build societal resilience and address the security implications of climate change, to face down foreign election interference, democratic backsliding, resurgent authoritarianism, and corruption, to strengthen our defense in cyberspace and produce and secure technologies of the future. Finland will play a vital role in the development of such technologies, and already is. The development of 5 and 6G technologies is going to be critical. Artificial intelligence technologies will be key. Quantum computing and green technologies, all of which Finland has taken a very aggressive stance on. And let me talk about NATO and Turkey and Hungary, if I can, for a minute. We want to be respectful to the process for all NATO members, including Turkey and Hungary. I've had the opportunity just in recent days to meet with the Hungarian ambassador here in Finland. And she assures me that this will get done in a timely manner. And I take her at her word. President Inistu recently talked to Prime Minister Orban, and Prime Minister Orban made it clear he is supportive, and what he said was Finland can count on his support. President Erdogan has met with the head of NATO just in the last week. Today, as we sit here, the new Prime Minister of Sweden is meeting in Turkey as well. Those are all positive signs. And if you've ever worked in diplomacy, Bill Burns, the director of the CIA, always talks about the last 3 feet of diplomacy. So these meetings that are taking place person to person, in person, are critically important, and I'm confident will advance the situation that we're dealing with. And taking a comparative view, historically, the accession process is moving quickly. Not quickly enough for me, and I'm sure not for you, but it is moving along quickly. And we need it to move quickly for all members, because Finland and Sweden joining the NATO alliance strengthens all of the other members in the alliance. Within the current context and given Russia's malign intention, Finland and Sweden's NATO accession complements the alliance capability, and we encourage all allies to continue working to ratify their accession as soon as possible. Let's talk a little bit about Russia and Ukraine. As our president has said, winning the war in Ukraine is to get Russia out of Ukraine completely and recognize Ukraine's sovereignty. Supporting Ukraine in that goal has been the right thing to do because it's important for all of us that Ukraine wins the war against Russia. If Putin wins, it's not only a defeat for Ukraine, but it will also be a defeat for all of us. It will make the world more dangerous. If Putin wins, we lose, simply put. The United States' ironclad commitment to Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity is steadfast and resolute. As our president said, the world has sent a clear message. Russia cannot erase a sovereign state from the map. Russia cannot change borders by force. Russia cannot seize another country's territory as its own. The United States will never recognize Russia's purported annexation of any territory, that it illegally seized in Ukraine. Any such territory remains the part of Ukraine. We continue to support Ukraine through humanitarian aid, security, economic aid. The United States has delivered unprecedented amount of military assistance to Ukraine, valued at approximately $18 billion since the beginning of the second invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. The United States has also provided more than $1.5 billion in humanitarian assistance this year to support the displaced, including refugees and other vulnerable populations. Since 2014, the United States has provided over $33 billion in support to Ukraine. We don't know as we sit here today when this war will be over, but we know this. Ukraine will emerge victorious, and the United States will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. There's been a lot of discussion about, is the U.S. going to continue to support Ukraine? The answer is absolutely yes. I wrote an op-ed that was just produced in the papers here the other day about this issue. We're in, and we're going to continue to support Ukraine until Russia leaves Ukraine. And let me move on to the Arctic, which is one of the, I have to say, one of the most interesting things when I looked at taking the assignment here in Finland. And the Arctic is profoundly changing. The region's warming at 4 times the global rate. President Anisu said not too long ago, what happens in the Arctic affects the rest of the world. It absolutely does, and we need to be mindful of that. Traditional ways of life are threatened. New economic opportunities are emerging. Russia's unprovoked war and brutal war against Ukraine is raising geopolitical tensions in a region that has long been characterized by peace and cooperation. The United States is an Arctic nation, which instills responsibility for the stewardship, protection of this region, especially during these periods of change. The United States seeks an Arctic region that is peaceful, that is stable, prosperous, and cooperative. The National Strategy for Arctic Region, which our administration released just recently, outlines the challenges facing the Arctic and articulates an affirmative U.S. agenda over the next 10 years to address these challenges. Our strategy addresses climate change with greater focus, fosters sustainable economic development by enhancing international governance and cooperation. To advance our priorities, we will consult, coordinate, and co-manage with Alaska Native tribes and communities. We'll deepen relationships with allies and partners and plan for the long lead investments. We'll cultivate innovative ideas and commit to a whole-of-government and evidence-based approach to the Arctic. We will reinforce our strong cooperation with like-minded Arctic countries, especially through the Arctic Council, and we'll expand cooperations with countries that uphold international law, rules, and standards for the region. As an Arctic nation, the United States has a responsibility to the region, to our citizens living there, and to all who call the unique place home. This Arctic strategy will position us to ensure security for the U.S. homeland, address the impacts of climate change, foster sustainable economic development, and strengthen cooperation with our allies and partners like Finland. And let's talk a little bit about the climate agenda. I mean, this is timely as the COP conference is taking place in Europe as we sit here today. The Biden administration and Secretary Kerry have led a bold climate agenda, starting with rejoining the Paris Accord. The United States has convened major climate summits, helped deliver critical agreements, and helped get 2/3 of the world's GDP on track to limit warming up to 1.5 degrees Celsius. President Biden also signed a historic piece of legislation in the United States that includes the biggest, most important climate commitment we have ever made in our history. Almost $500 billion committed to the climate initiative. This includes tens of billions of dollars in new investments in offshore wind and solar, doubling down on zero-emission vehicles, increasing energy efficiency, and supporting clean manufacturing. And the interesting thing is, industry is supporting this. Because of Russia's actions, the world is moving as quickly as possible away from carbon, and there's no going back. And that was something that I'm sure Putin had not calculated when he thought about invading Ukraine. Our Department of Energy estimates that this new law will reduce U.S. emissions by 1 gigaton a year by 2030, while unleashing a new era of clean energy powered and economic growth, and new clean energy jobs. Tackling the climate crisis will require not only implementing the commitments and goals that countries have already made, but enhancing those goals. And let's speak about emerging technologies, because this is critical, I think, to Finland. As we look down the road of the 21st century, we need to update and create rules that address key and emerging technologies. As Secretary Blinken has said on cyberspace and emerging technologies, we have a major stake in shaping the digital revolution that's happening around us and making sure that it serves our people, protects our interests, boosts our competitiveness, and upholds our values. We want to prevent cyber attacks that put our people, our networks, our companies, and critical infrastructure at risk. We want the internet to remain a transformative source for learning, for connection, for economic growth, not a tool for repression or disinformation. We want to shape the standards that govern new technology so they ensure quality, protect consumer health, safety, and facilitate trade, and respect people's rights. We want to make sure technology works for democracy, fighting back against disinformation, standing up for internet freedom, reducing the misuse of surveillance technology. And we want to promote cooperation, advancing this agenda tech by tech, issue by issue, with democratic partners like Finland by our side. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Douglas, Hickey, thank you very much. And please sit down here. And now it's time for discussion and questions, if some. First, I will ask you that when I was some weeks ago in Croatia and I met there in summit people around the world, and there's a Prim summit, and one of those issues was there that the cold winter in Europe could harm this fight against Russia, sanction and that kind of things. How do you think about this situation?
Well, I think we all need to be mindful of people's needs and requirements. So the winter is going to be a challenge. We'd be naive not to think it will be a challenge. But having said that, if you look around Europe and you look around Finland, the government has been very active in trying to find alternative sources for energy. And early on, I think just a month after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February, within a month, the Finnish government had announced in a relationship with a company called Accelerate, based in the United States, that will be bringing liquefied natural gas to Finland. And if done, and it's supposed to happen in December, if it happens and it happens on time, it will mitigate all the natural gas that was going to come from Russia. And there's other countries around Europe that are doing the same thing. Some are doing it better than others, there's no doubt. But people are taking active steps. I personally don't believe that Russia is going to be in really any long-term position to tell anybody in Europe what they ought to do. They might have some short-term opportunities, but they don't translate long-term. So I expect it may be hard, and we all have to prepare for that. We need to be thoughtful about it. But I expect that we'll be able to get through it, and we'll be able to get through it, the right way, and not go back. I think it's going to be critically important.
How do you think about your own country possibilities to help us about the gas situation? We are not in Finland so dependent about the natural gas which is coming from, came from Russia, but in general, it is very important. Mm-hmm. It has been very important to the European countries. What can your country help us in Europe more?
Well, I don't know if we can help more, but we're helping. And, you can always do more, I'm sure. But it's important to us, and we have done it. We've done it in the UK, we've done it in Italy, we're helping people through this process. And not just the government. I think it's important for any of these programs to succeed. You need industry as well to participate in that process. And you're starting to see that with new technologies being developed, many of which are being developed here, by the way. So I think it's going to take a, all-of-world approach here to solve this. It's not just going to be governments. It's got to be industry that help in that process for sure.
Mr. Hickey.
Thank you for a very interesting speech. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the US-China relations after the Chinese Party Congress and now with the China, what role China perhaps can play in the Russia-Ukraine conflict solving process? Thank you.
Yeah, just like I think your president said, Putin has ripped off his mask and we saw who he is. I think we're getting a real good view of what China is about. And I'll give you my background's in technology, and I've had the opportunity to visit with a whole series of companies here in Finland. And I think you know this, but Finland and Sweden are the only two really 5 and 6G providers that are trusted by democracies around the world. And when you do a deal with Nokia or Ericsson, you're doing a deal with that company. If you do a deal with Huawei, you're doing a deal with Huawei and the PRC. And you're putting at risk as a country or company your security by virtue of doing that. So I think people are starting to realize the complication of China and what kind of technologies they've taken, what kind of technologies they've built. I will give you just a little aside. The interesting thing about NATO to me is not just from a defense perspective, but it has opened up the eyes of investors around the world of what's happening here in Finland. So Finland now is on, the map of people that it may not have been before. And investors are starting to look at companies and technologies that exist in Finland. And one of the reasons they're doing it is they trust the intellectual protocol that if something is developed in Finland or the United States, it's a protective technology. Not the same in China. So I think that's, one important element. The other is, this is why, there's another part of it, this is why Ukraine needs to win. Not only to send a message to Russia, I mean, it absolutely has to do that, it also sends a message to the PRC that the world will not stand by and let someone else go into a sovereign entity and take it over. So I think that's going to be a really important piece of this perspective. Picture a year from now if the Russians took over Ukraine, which I don't think is going to happen. If they did, the Chinese might look at it and say, well, maybe we could do this. If you flip it the other way and you say, Ukraine sends Russia home, then the Chinese have to look at it and say, not only did the Ukrainians do that, the world did it. The Ukrainians fought it every day, let's be honest. But the world supported the effort, whether it be from a military perspective, humanitarian perspective, infrastructure, look what's going on now. It sends a clear message to other autocracies that it's not okay and will not be supported. That's why it's so important that the Ukrainians win.
Thank you. There is another question.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your most interesting speech. I'm Jussi Seppälä, ex-foreign correspondent, ex-diplomat, and now CEO dealing with strategic communications and very much interested in US foreign policy, of course. I wonder today the midterm elections might lead to the Republicans taking most likely the House, if not the Senate as well. If they take the House with its budgetary powers, how do you see those ramifications concerning Ukraine and perhaps even more broadly with the election deniers perhaps doing well concerning NATO in a broader perspective? Thank you.
So first of all, tell me again your background. You're a CEO.
Yeah, I'm now CEO of a strategic communications company, actually. We're located next to the parliament. But I used to be a foreign correspondent and a diplomat.
Okay. Interesting background, right? Well, I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't expect some changes in the midterms. And there will be, there's no doubt. I just don't know how much or how broad, but I'll give you at least, my own perspective on this. Historically, the incumbent party loses seats in our House of Representatives or in our legislative body in the midterms. Historically, it's when President Obama was in his first term, he called it a shellacking, what took place in Congress. So I fully expect there's going to be a change. I don't know the probability, if you read all the tea leaves, says it's more probable in the House than it is in the Senate, but it could happen in both. So let's just think about that for a second. So I had the opportunity before the vote on NATO accession went to the U.S. Senate, I went back and I met with 17 senators with General Kievan and your ambassador to the United States. And we had all these meetings. We met with all these senators. And we had a friendly bet, I have to tell you, of what it would be. And I thought we were going to get 90 votes at the end of our meetings. We ended up getting 95 votes, 95. So we had 95% agreement on NATO accession, which is really incredible in the U.S. Senate. I hate to tell you, Finland only had 94% in Parliament. So, and I tell the president that every time I see him, that, we were 95, you were 94. But all kidding aside, it was remarkable because it was Democrats and Republicans. It was people from the South, from the North, from the East, and they all agreed that NATO was critically important. That support for NATO and the accession of Sweden and Finland will not change. It might change by a couple votes, but it's not going to change. And you look at the support that the U.S. government has given to Ukraine and continues to give, and it's not just the U.S. government. You know, Finland has, Sweden has, the UK, virtually, you know, all of Europe has. I expect that to continue because of what I said earlier, that people realize if Putin wins, the world is a much more insecure place than it would be otherwise. If Putin wins, it gives other autocracies the idea that they might do it too. So I don't think, so we might lose a couple people on the margin, but I don't think the people that are willing to listen to what the reality is are going to move away. And do we want to win in Ukraine? No doubt. And the way we're going to win is the amazing fighting that the Ukrainians are doing on their own. The support we're giving them. Let's be honest, they're fighting a war for all of us. So we need to continue to give that support. So I'm confident that we'll continue to give that support to Ukraine, militarily, humanitarian, and infrastructure. I'm sure we're going to do that. So I've heard all the discussions around it. I just don't buy it because I've met many of the people in the Senate and in Congress, and when you have these kind of conversations with them, they understand the importance of this, that Ukraine has to win for so many different reasons. The biggest reason is it's right. It's absolutely right they have to win. Behind that is all the other things, but they do have to win.
I met Mrs. Pelosi also in Croatia at the same summit, and we discussed about the Arctic, which you take up in your speech. And I asked her, is it possible to have a much more stringent cooperation between the Western countries in the Arctic, because it's now under the power of Russia, that area. And if I have understood right, also China is very interesting about that area, but now they are disappeared about there, about that area. How do you think, is there possibility to strengthen our cooperation, and what about China in that area?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, obviously, Russia owns a huge piece of the landmass that makes up the Arctic, and it's unfortunate by virtue of the actions they've taken that they can't, you know, be in diplomatic discussions with people. And it's only because they did it. We didn't, you didn't do it, the Finns didn't do it, the US didn't do it, the Swedes didn't do it, they did it. That's why they're not at the table. And would we rather they be at the table? Of course. And it's important they be at the table, but they need to earn the right. So the way they earn the right is get the heck out of Ukraine. I mean, I have a couple other ideas how they might get it right, but you know, first is get the heck out of Ukraine. And then we can have a discussion about how you balance diplomatic relationships going forward. Now, while that's happening, and I keep saying I see Ukraine winning, so it's only a question of when. I'm hoping it's sooner than later. And then the Russians are going to have to deal with other countries on so many different things. So, and one of them is going to be, we're all moving away from carbon, and they're not. So you can keep burning up carbon for, you know, maybe another generation, but it will ultimately be gone. And then what are you going to do? Even the Saudis, I mean, think about this. The Saudis are investing in solar and in green technologies because they understand carbon is finite and renewables are not. So I think they're going to get back to the table, but it takes them getting back to the table. They need to take different actions. Now, what are we going to do in the meantime? There's a lot we can do in the Arctic just with the cooperation of like-minded countries. And we need to continue to do that. And we need to be visionaries in how we approach it. We can't just sit back and say, oh, Russia's pulled out, now we can't do anything. That's unacceptable. We can't do that. And we won't do that. And Finland won't do it, and we won't do it, and Sweden won't do it. So it's critically important we continue to be part of it. But I'd be naive to say, we can do it all. It's going to be really hard without the country that has a big piece of the Arctic. So, but that's up to them, how they want to do that. On China, I have to say, I sort of chuckle when I hear China talk about the Arctic, that they're a near Arctic country. Of course they have an interest. Everybody has an interest, and we should. But we need to think of it as a peaceful place, and we need to respect the indigenous people that are there and the lifestyle that exists there, and be sensitive to the environment. That should really fall upon those people, those countries that are contiguous to the Arctic. Last time I looked at a map, China is not.
Some expertise say that now that Russia is very, they are very hurry in the Arctic area to use those natural raw materials, and they are seeking now way to have them to their own hand. How it seems for U.S. side.
Yeah, I think Russia has sort of moved away from a lot of things that they were thinking about doing because they're so focused on Ukraine right now. I really don't know, but what I do know is for the Arctic to be what it should be and can be and what we owe it to be, we all need it to be, we need to be at the table with a thoughtful strategy around climate. And they're not at this point. So I'm not quite sure how to connect those dots right now.
Okay, there is one question.
What is your assessment of the popularity of President Putin amongst his own people?
Oh. I don't know, but this is what I've read and maybe surmised. So, like I said, I come from a technology background, so I'm always interested in what technology people are using and why. And after the invasion, second invasion in February, he cut off really all media other than government-controlled media in Russia. And the sale of virtual private networks in Russia went up exponentially. And it wasn't because they were trying to get a hotspot, somewhere. It's because they were trying to get content, what's going on, and can I find it from somewhere other than a government-controlled source? So I think that's interesting. So people want to know. The other part of it is when he announced his conscription model of bringing 300,000 citizens into the armed forces, there was mass exodus of people in Russia. So I think before that, it didn't really touch the people that lived in St. Petersburg and Moscow. It touched people that were minorities and that were poor. Were really serving in the Russian army, in the infantry. And now all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, it affects me. And the reaction was, well, I'm leaving the country. Lots of people decided they were going to leave the country. So my gut tells me they're not real happy with it. But there is an element within Russia that don't think he's doing enough, that don't think he's being brutal enough to Ukraine, and that want to put the whole idea of the Russia Republic back together. I think it's a relatively sizable number within Russia. I don't know what percentage, but I think it's a relatively sizable number. So we should not, my way of thinking, we should not sit back and think someone is going to overturn Putin. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. And when that happens, in many cases, the end result is somebody worse than what you had, if you can imagine that. So I think our strategy should be help Ukraine beat Russia, get Russia out of Ukraine, and put them back where they should be, and let them earn the right to have a discussion relative to diplomatic relations in the future. But I don't know how many Russians agree with, but I think it's got to be a sizable number.
Do you think it is realistic that Ukraine can beat them out?
Well, here's, when you think back to February 24th, President Putin thought he was going to walk in and take over in a couple days, and people were going to have flags up and say, welcome. Well, that didn't happen. He thought NATO was weak and had no resolve. That didn't happen. NATO's getting stronger. He thought the EU was weak and would have no resolve. The EU's gotten stronger. He thought the US had no resolve and didn't have good bilateral relationships around the world. My God. You're talking about you run an agency on communications. You could not pay him enough money to have what happened to Putin have happened to Putin, right? All the things he didn't want to have happen, happened. NATO got stronger, the US relations got stronger, bilaterals got stronger, EU got stronger, energy independence has gotten stronger. It's amazing. So in a weird way, I said this the other night at some, we ought to be thanking Putin for what he's done. Look at what he's done. But he didn't expect any of that. He didn't expect any of that. But I mean, that's sort of where we are now. So from a democracy perspective, I think it's really important that we continue those kind of relationships. That's why it's important that Finland and Sweden get into NATO and get in as quickly as possible. It sends the right signal to Putin and other autocracies. I think it's critically important.
Okay, is there other questions or comments? There.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador, for your speech and interesting insights. My name is Jarkko Eloranta. I'm the president of the Confederation of Finnish Trade Unions. So we are mostly interested in jobs and that kind of stuff. So coming back to the US-Finnish relations, and especially the trade, as your experience here in Finland also, how do you see that the trade between Finland and US will develop in the future? And have you seen any more interest for US companies to Finland and vice versa? How much the Finnish companies are putting effort to the US market? And then we have one special issue. We have long ago tried to sell an icebreaker to US. So when will that happen?
Well, my predecessor, Ambassador Pence, I know, was working really aggressively on the icebreaker piece of it. I don't have an answer on that. I'm going to see him next week, and I'll ask him if he's got any updates he wants to share with me. But it's a complicated issue. I just can't predict. I just don't know. On the other pieces of tech or other pieces of trade, I'm really encouraged. And I see, I was out at VTT the other day, and I see what's going on quantum computing. Clearly, Finland is a leader. I see what's going on with small modular or specialized modular reactors. I'm very encouraged by that. Finland is clearly a leader there, and the regulating sources in Finland are regarded as world-class. So if those things get approved here, they can get approved virtually anywhere. So I think that's a really good thing. The other is around 5 and 6G. I have to be honest, I would love to have a US company that was participating in 5 and 6G. Well, we don't. We have Nokia and Ericsson, both of which are great companies. Nokia has more employees in the United States than it does here in Finland, and has been a really great partner. They own Bell Labs. I mean, I just see huge opportunities for Finnish companies and European companies and US companies to hang off of sort of the networks that Nokia and Ericsson are building. So I think there's big opportunity there. I look at Slush, which is taking place, I don't know, next week or the week after. And I always hear this thing about Finns, that they're not good marketers. And I got to tell you, if you can convince somebody to come to Helsinki in November and pay for it, you are an amazing marketeer. So I have friends coming over from Silicon Valley that are really excited, to be here because they're going to see amazing companies and amazing technologies in November in Finland. I think that's a real positive thing. And then when I got here, I guess it was right in the middle of May, I hosted Silicon Valley Bank at the embassy. And these are folks I've known for a long time. And we just presented ideas on concepts of companies and categories. And I will tell you, the excitement, I think, is real that's there. And the idea that Finland treats IP the same way that, like, the United States does, that the legal system works here, the education system, higher education in particular, the type and quality of engineers that are educated here in Finland are pretty phenomenal. So I think people look at that and say, here's an opportunity we didn't see before, but we need to look at. So I think it's really encouraging. So I'm very optimistic. We're going to do as much as we can to have U.S. companies and investors and the like come to Finland and see what's happening here. And I think next week there's 500 investors coming to Slush, which is pretty remarkable. And it takes a while for this all to develop, but this could be Helsinki, or the triangle that you look at could be a Silicon Valley-like opportunity, because all of the ingredients are here. Education, clearly, the protection of IP rights, it's a democracy, we understand how we all work together. Those are all important ingredients. What we need more of is startup and venture capital funding to really help, put gas on, or maybe I shouldn't say gas, put renewable energy on that fire.
Okay, there's another question.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, I have worked very much with the World Trade Organization in Geneva, and therefore I will ask you, what do you see the future of the World Trade Organization, WTO, now in these days?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. It's similar to what I said in some of my comments. We need to understand the rules and regulations of how we're going to trade with each other and trade technologies. And if there's parties that are part of an organization that are not going to participate the same way, by the same rules, then we shouldn't have them part of the organization. So I think that it's not just the WTO, there's telecommunications organizations that are setting standards. It's really important to get that right. And in order to get it right, we need to be really thoughtful about what democracies, quite frankly, are participating in those discussions, and not let anyone, the United States should not be the leader. It ought to be at the table, just like Finland should be, like the UK should be, like others should be, but trade in a fair and open way. I think that makes sense. And right now we have some challenges with that, with the WTO and with some of the telecommunications standards bodies, but we need to be mindful of that.
Okay.
Rasmus Inreen, Hybrid Center of Excellence. Thank you for the remarks, Ambassador. I think it was a great combination of things people wanted to hear and things people needed to hear, so really appreciate it. A question on disinformation and the media environment. As I think it's becoming increasingly clear that the self-regulation in the industry is not, in all cases, enough So is there an effort in the US to regulate the media platforms and the social media platforms? If not, should there perhaps be? And finally, is there an opportunity for closer cooperation between the US and the EU in this case?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you need to differentiate between traditional media and social media. So traditional media is regulated. There are only certain things you can do on traditional media. On social media, not so much. And those of you, that I've talked to, some of you I've talked about this, I don't have a lot of sympathy here for the social media piece, which is people like, I'll give you one example, people like Facebook say we're not a media company, we're a technology platform. Well, then don't run news stories. And if you do, you need to make sure that they're sourced and they're true. And if they're not true, you need to tell people you made a mistake. That's what traditional media does. In social media, that doesn't happen. So I would be comfortable with the same regs that sit on regular media, sit on social media. But the argument will be, we're not a media company, we're a platform, we're a technology company. Then I say to you, pick one. You can't be both, pick one. If you want to be a media company, be a media company. You want to be a tech company with a platform, there's always rules associated with that. Telephone companies can't just do anything they want, and they can't transmit certain data. I mean, there's rules around all that stuff. So I think what's happened is the companies like Facebook have done a jujitsu with legislative bodies around the world to convince them that they're not a media company. This is my own personal view, but I know I have a lot of support for this. They are. And if you are, you need to be treated as, they have ad revenue, right? So that's usually an indicator of a media company. So then you just need to be honest about it. The other is, I talked a little bit earlier about the moral piece of this, is when if you're a company, I've run 3 public companies, if you know you're doing something wrong, and if you know that the information is incorrect around vaccines, as an example, then you ought to have the courage to say it was wrong, or not let it be put up on your platform, because you know it's wrong. So I think they've done a great job of confusing legislative bodies around the world, not just in the United States. But I think it's important that there's some kind of regulation, because self-regulation has not worked at Twitter, it hasn't worked at Facebook. It's not working at Twitter as we sit here today. So I think it's important. I think it's really important. And many of these companies really know that it's disinformation. And it's anything but courageous to propagate that, I think. But it's a huge, huge issue. And we're going to see it in our elections in the United States right now. I'm sure you'll see it in your next elections. We'll see it around the world. But it's a really, really important issue for sure.
Okay, is there other questions, comments? They say they are satisfied.
Good. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. When I walked in, I saw, I think it was this side of the room, they were all drinking wine. I thought, this is my kind of crowd. So I want to thank you for having me here today and the dialogue that we've had. But thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a little present for you.
Thank you.
This is Niinistön medal.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Kiitoksia kaikille ja 15. päivä marraskuuta jatketaan.